I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst and host of CNN's newest business show, First Move.
Julia Chatterley, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
How was your day?
Pretty cold, I have to say. And you know, in terms of Brexit, it is a momentous day. It's, 47 years since we joined the EU. I find it's quite anticlimactic as well after years of covering this story. It's a shame in some ways for many people, but for others it's celebratory, so mixed feelings, I think.
What's next? What happens actually after 11 o'clock today?
You see, that's a great point. Everything changes and yet nothing changes actually, because we move into this transition period. The key is going to be what happens between now and the end of December. Do we get some kind of trade deal with the EU? Does the UK manage to sign deals with other countries too? And if not, are we back where we were at a cliff edge? And we've seen this many times in the past. And the Prime Minister's promised not to extend this transition period, so December could be lively.
We'll see exactly what's happening in the next period, during this transition period actually. It will be quite interesting to cover these events for you. As a journalist on financial and economic area, what's your feeling actually?
You know, it's very interesting. We normally see trade deals taking 4 or 5 years to sign, but these two, the 27 nations remaining in the UK, of course, they know each other pretty well. So something very simple, not too complicated, could be struck in the coming months. I expect the Brexit battles, in a way, will continue, quite frankly. But from a business perspective, I would always say services, not trade, are 80% of the UK economy. So let's not forget the importance of services too, not covered by the negotiations to come. Vitally important.
Let's see the next steps. What are the most important next steps in your opinion? What should UK do? What should the European Union do?
I think that we have to recognise that there's been a lot of rhetoric, a lot of posturing throughout this process, particularly over the last 3.5 years. I think you have to expect that will continue, so try to ignore some of the rhetoric and the noise that we see. I think the UK government needs to focus on regalvanising, reuniting the UK and bringing the leavers and the remainers together. For the EU, it's tougher. They have their own problems, the individual nations. I do hope lessons have been learned here. They didn't want the UK to leave. They made this battle very difficult. They also wanted to send a message to other EU nations. It's not a good time and it's not a good thing to leave. But at the same time, I don't think it needed to be this way, and I do hope lessons have been learned.
Do the Britons ask you, Julia, I know you from CNN, you are the main anchor, tell us what should we do in our personal life?
What do you mean with regards to Brexit or just in general?
In general regarding Brexit, because I think their life will change also.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do get questions about how easy it's going to be to travel as a UK citizen in Europe, but beyond.
Do we need visas and so, yeah?
Absolutely. What it's going to be like to be a UK citizen or an EU citizen working in this country. So there are all sorts of questions. And I think the answer to that, at least in the short term, is nothing will change. It could all change after December. But I think, again, to go back to your earlier point, these are all questions that the UK government, that the EU also need to be discussing. And I think they'll try and make it as easy as they can to allow workers to move between nations.
Știri în exclusivitate, informații extrem de importante au venit de aici, din studioul CNN Londra, pe tema Brexitului în aceste zile.
It is 11 o'clock in London, midnight in Brussels. The moment of Brexit, it has arrived.
A historic referendum in 2016 led to negotiations and years of political infighting in Westminster. And it all culminates here and now.
Tell me, how was covering Brexit moment for you?
The moment was, it was peculiar, as it was for most people in the country, because you had
people down the road from Downing Street, where I was with another of our anchors, Richard Quest, and my team, you had them celebrating, filling Parliament Square. These are people who'd campaigned their entire lives for Brexit, and you could hear them, you could hear the shouting, you could hear the celebration. But then we knew that large swathes of the country, and definitely the capital, were commiserating. They were sad, some distraught, and some very trepidatious about what the future is actually going to hold, because now we're into this uncertain period where the future details are supposedly thrashed out. But standing there after covering it for 3.5 years at CNN, 2.5 of those years as a reporter, covering only Brexit, it definitely felt like it went out with a whimper and not a bang. After all the sensationalism and the non-stop coverage, it was odd that it finished in the way that it did.
It was a theoretically a historical moment, but we didn't felt it like that, didn't we? Yeah.
And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, because you rightly point out, you know, in theory and politically and legally, it's hugely significant. This is the end of 47 years of a relationship of the UK and the European Union. Obviously, the new relationship now needs to be forged. But one of the reasons it felt perhaps the significance didn't resonate as strongly was because the government intentionally didn't want to focus on it too much. Boris Johnson has articulated part of his mission being to bring the country back together. Now, this is the issue that has split the nation. It's split families and friends. It's become such a deep-seated problem in British politics, which people now identify with so strongly, even more than their previous political beliefs. So he didn't want to rub Brexit in the nose of those people he didn't want to leave, but it still needed to be marked. And then also the fact that Parliament's under construction, Big Ben couldn't chime or bong, which is what a lot of people wanted. There are a lot of circumstantial factors as to why the moment itself was never going to be marked with the historical significance that people looking back on the moment will attribute to it.
If we are looking at this period of 3.5 years, what was the most interesting moment for you as a journalist?
I would say the first time that the speaker, John Bercow, who I interviewed twice, the first time he waded in a way that changed the course of the debate. No one expected that. The role of the speaker in the British Parliament is usually a little bit like, I wouldn't want to say like wallpaper, but they blend into the background and they facilitate the debate. But he put himself forward as an actor, and he changed the course of affairs and allowed Remainers in Parliament a much bigger voice, and it made Theresa May's life very difficult, and that really changed the course. But I'd say the other most interesting times were the nights where there were votes happening, and either they were tremendous defeats, the likes of which a Prime Minister hadn't seen for centuries, or they were on a knife edge, and at that point you wondered, what way will this go? It's not for sure that Britain will actually leave. Will there be a second referendum? And those moments for me are the most interesting, because it really did feel the government was so chaotic, the future was so uncertain that no one knew what would happen.
And nobody knows now, actually. We have a transition period. Everybody will discuss in the near future about the citizens, about what the trade's going to be like, but nobody knows today what's next.
I feel like the whole experience of Brexit, including what you've just said, is almost like trying to see your hand in the fog. That's as far as it goes. You know, no one ever knows what's going to happen with it or where it's going to end up. And then you get a little bit further, you get a little bit of clarity, you can just about see your hand in the bad weather. That's how I see it, and I think now this next phase is much the same. We now know that we've got Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, somebody who espouses his commitment to a free trade deal, something along the lines of Canada, and divergence from the EU. But we don't know how that's going to materialise, and we don't know if he's even going to be able to achieve what he says he wants. So with Brexit, the future's always a question mark, and then I feel like you just make little incremental steps of clarity throughout.
What's next, in your opinion?
Well, this next phase, 11 months is not a long time to achieve a trade deal or achieve any kind of agreements on political cooperation, security cooperation. that the magnitude of the task is massive.
And we've seen how the negotiations were for 3 years and a half.
Exactly, and I have spoken to members of parliament who've said, oh, I wish that everybody united earlier, because then we would have been able to make more progress, but that was never going to happen. And they have wasted a lot of time with the infighting with those people who wanted another referendum or to revoke Article 50 or a different type of Brexit, stymieing the process and stopping any progress from being made because they were fighting in amongst themselves. So now they have this truncated time period. So they have much to do. Boris Johnson will need to present the EU with exactly how he sees this free trade deal working. The EU are most concerned about maintaining that level playing field. So those are going to be the points of tension, because Boris Johnson will want to make Britain competitive and the EU will want to keep Britain on this level playing field. And the EU will expect the impetus to come from the UK, as it always has done.
Let's imagine a history book. How would you describe that day of the Brexit?
It was, you mean Friday rather than the day of the referendum?
Exactly.
I would say it was muted, and those who wanted to leave the EU didn't have the Independence Day that they dreamed of and in some instances been promised, because it wasn't a giant show of fireworks. The light display was fairly tame that they had at Downing Street, and also we're now in this transition period, so it wasn't the clean break that some Brexiteers had been hoping for and dreaming of. And then for those who wanted Britain to remain in the European Union, it wasn't quite the cliff edge that they were so afraid of, and it wasn't the outcome that they wanted, but it wasn't quite as bad in some ways as maybe their worst fears. So nobody really got everything that they wanted. And because the future of Britain's relationship is still so uncertain, it's a bit premature for Brexiteers to claim all their victory yet, because we don't know what that relationship's going to look like.
Thank you so much, Bianca.
You're very welcome. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
As a journalist, it's a historical moment, actually. It's the first time when a country is exiting the European Union.
Yes.
What do you personally feel?
You know, I think the message, if we could rewind 3.5 years, would be to learn to bend before you break. For EU leaders and for the council there. I think the idea of a United States of Europe is quite abhorrent to many nations, not just the UK here. I think everybody has seen, for many different reasons, be it immigration, economic weakness, anger among their populations, a draw to nationalism, and we've seen that all over the EU. So to go back to the point about lessons learned, I think there needs to be a better balance found between powers, structure within individual nations and what that means collectively as the EU. And I think that remains an open question, and it's going to be a question long beyond the UK's exit. Lessons do need to be learned.
The Romanian public is watching you right now. Antena 3 is CNN affiliated. What's your message?
Be optimistic. Be optimistic about the UK. Be optimistic about the outlook here, because there's many good things I think about the EU, and we'll still be friends. I hope the UK will still be friends. That's my message.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julia.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Va destabiliza Brexitul tot ceea ce înseamnă economia la nivel european? Vom simți noi în România efectele cu adevărat în perioada următoare? Va mai fi Londra, de exemplu, acel hub financiar? Am discutat cu experți în domeniu, iată ce spun ei. What's your advice, your biggest advice on Brexit?
That's a very good question, actually. Yes, I would say the first bit of advice I would say is relax. You know, and when we left the European Union 2 days ago, so now we are formally outside the. Well, no, in fact, no, we're in this kind of transition period.
Exactly, for
but
1
at least
year.
we definitely will go. But there is a very famous song which is called "I Got Along Without You Before I Met You. I'm going to get along without you now."
Okay.
So I think that's a little bit like the Great Britain with the European Union. You know, we're still friends. We're in Europe. We're just not in the European Union.
Will it be a financial shock afterwards? I don't know, in 2 or 3 years from now?
You know what? There's a lot of people who give negative news and negative stories, and let's face it, a lot of news has to be negative. If it's positive, sometimes it's not news. So negative stories always get a lot of attention. My personal view is that the negative impact will be limited. And quite frankly, we already have, in the United Kingdom, we already have 4 million people from the European Union living and working in the UK. Plus we have 6 million other people from other countries of the world. So we have 10 million people from all the countries of the world living in the UK, and many of them live in central London. So I think the impact will be fairly limited.
In terms of economics or financial, what is the biggest problem that you think it will appear in the near future? What is the biggest danger, let's say?
Yeah, I think it is precisely that the European Union will give us a hard time. I think that other countries will be more open. I think even Donald Trump, we have this so-called special relationship between the United Kingdom and the US. I think Donald Trump looks favorably on the fact that we've extricated ourselves from Europe. He's not the answer to everything, clearly.
Of course.
But at least, we do have some powerful friends in powerful places. So, and we're still in Europe. My family is very international. I speak French, I speak other languages. My wife speaks French, my daughter speaks French. We have a house in France. We have a lot of, connections with Europe, So even though we're out of the Union, we're still in Europe. My next door neighbour is French. 50% of the people who live in this neighbourhood are not English. So that we have a very, very cosmopolitan country. We're an island, but we're very well connected with the whole of Europe and the whole of the world.
We have 1 year of transition. We will have important negotiations in the near future regarding the trade, regarding any relations actually between UK and the EU.
Right.
Do you consider that in this period the main focus should be on?
Well, I think it's trade negotiations. Now that Brexit is finished, it's done. Nobody can talk about Brexit anymore. And in fact, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, in his speech once we'd left, he did not mention the word Brexit. So the word Brexit, you can forget it. It's done. The question now is, what is the relationship going forward? It's not a divorce. Well, it's sort of a divorce, but it's not really a divorce. I mean, but we're still living together almost. We're still living very closely. I mean, in central London, we have about 300,000 French people. We have in the UK probably 500,000 Romanian people.
Yeah.
So we have a big population of people whose first language is not English, and they were not born in the UK. So we are very much a cosmopolitan melting pot.
What will the people actually feel in this period?
Well, most people, during the implementation period, people won't notice much of a difference because we're still applying all of the various rules and regulations. So the big change will come at the end of December.
Starting the end of December, will their lives be totally different, or in which terms will be different?
I don't think it'll be totally different. For most people, most of the time, they probably won't notice much of a difference. But gradually, the UK will start to diverge from Europe. We will set our own rules and regulations. We'll have our own immigration system. We're in control of our own fisheries, control of our own agriculture system, and decisions affecting the lives of people in the UK will now be made in the United Kingdom and not in Brussels. And so gradually they will notice the difference as we diverge over the years. But there won't really be a sudden massive change that they would notice.
Over there is the Romanian public who says hello. What's your message for them?
I would say hello to the Romanian public. And in fact, as I say, 500,000 of your citizens are here in the United Kingdom. Many thousands of them are here in central London. And in fact, within a few miles of here, I know Romanian people, Polish people. I know many, many people from Europe. So I would say, keep the faith, stay in the family. We will still see you as brothers and sisters, and we look forward to seeing you and doing business with you.
Thank you so much. It was a very good discussion.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much to you.